Welcome to the Playbook presented by the Leaders Lab. I'm Ken Eslick, and if you're a leader or founder who wants to hire top talent, scale your business, and sell for more, you're in the right place. Each week, Onika Kwatsha and I bring you practical, actionable advice that you can put to work immediately to make an impact in your business today. And now, here's this week's episode. Welcome back to the Playbook. Ken Eslick here once again with Onika Kwatsha. And today, guys, we're going to talk about something. It's one of the simplest but most impactful leadership tools that I've used in all my years of business. And I call it the Team GPA. I didn't invent the underlying philosophy. It actually traces back to Jack Welch during his time leading General Electric. So I'm going back several decades here to the old ABC player format that Jack Welch adopted back then and was made popular in his book called Straight from the Gut. But over the years, I adapted it into a simple scorecard that gave me an almost instant read on the health of a team. And remarkably, it became one of the strongest predictors for team performance that I've ever seen. Onika, welcome. Good to see you here.
Good to see you too, Ken. And I'm so curious to know, where did this idea even come from?
That Jack Welch book was huge in corporate America at the time. And right now it's a little bit polarizing because it sounds a little rough. His idea is that you would always cut your bottom 10%. I'm not really a fan of that. I'm a fan of let's get everybody that we can into the A player, B player framework. And then there's nobody to cut, right? There's only people to improve. But I understand where he's coming from. And he inherited this massively bloated company called General Electric that I think at the time had 300 and something thousand people and just couldn't sustain, right? So the idea was, okay, take a look at your team, and 20% of your team typically is going to be an A player. And the definition of an A player would be proven results over time. They fit your culture. These are your people that just get it done, and they get it done consistently, right? Then you have the middle 70%. It's a big chunk of people, but it's the people who are neither bad nor are they knocking your socks off. They're just kind of in there doing their job. They get it done. They're pleasant. They're fine. And then you have your bottom 10%, which is they don't have it. There's either an extreme disconnect with performance or with culture. I've found that usually it's culture. Usually they're just not on board with what you're doing. They're not on board with you. You're not on board with them. They don't want to be there. Something else is going on in their lives. But that's where it came from. And so when I got promoted, Onika, from being a local GM, where I really felt like I knew our people and I knew how they were wired and I knew who was great at their job and I knew who was on kind of the improvement track or whatever. But then you go into running multiple locations and it was like, how can I get a read just very quickly on a team? I just sat down with one of our GMs once and I said, let's just score them out. Let's just write it down. And I'll use, since Jack Welch was using A, B, and C, I'll do it like it's a report card. And in the States here, if you get an A, that's worth 4 points. A B is worth 3 points. A C is worth 2 points. And so the idea would be that if you want your A's to outnumber your C's, then your overall GPA would need to be at least a 3.0, maybe more like a 3.2. And so that's what we did. We sat down and we said, what's the GPA here? Where are you at? And as we started working on improving the team GPA for each of these locations, Onika, everything went up. Everything went up with it. Every measurable stat went up with it. It was crazy. If you took a team from a 3.0 to a 3.3, which doesn't sound like a ton, but it actually is, because what it might mean is that a couple of C players left, a couple of B players became A players. Yeah. It's a big shift, right? It doesn't sound like a ton on paper, but it's a big shift. And so what would happen if we could honestly say that the GPA now, the grade point average for this location just went from a 3.0 to a 3.3, sales would go up, profit would typically go up, morale would go up, turnover would go down. There really wasn't a measurable statistic over time that wouldn't tie back in to the health of our talent on our team, right? And it made us, I think, better leaders too, because we became a little more obsessed with, how do I get my B players? I don't want them to become C players, right? I want them to become A players. So it made us very obsessed with the development of people.
Yeah, I really like that because a lot of people sitting in the seat as an employee are like, is the leadership team invested in my growth?
Care.
And it's really cool knowing that on the other end of that interaction, there were those conversations happening, if that makes sense. And I'm curious to know how you would define an A, B, or C player in that context.
Some of it is a little bit, I don't want to say arbitrary, but if you're running good stats, then the measurements are, especially when you look at something like sales, you know when a sales
Yeah.
rep is performing and when they're not. Attitude's a little bit different, right? Attitude becomes more like, hey, is this person aligned with our culture? Do they want to be here? Do they work well with their teammates and stuff like that?
Yeah.
But when you're talking together as a group of people, and it's like you might have a junior leader in the room, you might have the GM, and then somebody like myself who was visiting, there's kind of a consensus. If all three people are like, man, that person is difficult to work with, it doesn't seem like they want to be here. That doesn't mean we're going to leave the meeting and go see you later to that person. It might mean that it's time for a sit down and saying, we just had a leadership meeting. We're unclear if this is the right place for you. What's going on? Do you want to be here? Is this the right place to be? I think one of the best and kindest things you can do for people, even though it stings in the moment, is to let people know what's expected and where they stand. I knew we had people on our team that knew that we did this, and they'd go, where am I? I'd be like, well, you're great. But you're a B player. Why am I a B player? I'd be like, I think you know the answer to that. And then they'd go, it's not my attitude. And I go, you're right. And they go, oh, it's just because I'm newer and I haven't really been hitting KPIs yet. I'm like, we have high hopes for you, but you're too new to have been consistent from a results standpoint, right? You're new, but you're showing a lot of promise. So there's the B players that are upshifting, and you've got the B players that could be downshifting, right? Which is scary. I think the A's and the C's play a big part on the B's. The B's haven't really decided, even though they're the biggest group, most of them have not decided where they're going to be yet.
Okay.
They're hanging out. They're waiting for something or someone to inspire them, whether it's themselves, whether it's a leader, whether it's another person, or they're going to go join the other crowd. If someone doesn't come in and inspire them, or they don't inspire themselves, or they don't see a future in what they're doing, and this goes on too long, then all of a sudden they're hanging out with the folks that maybe don't want to be with the company anymore. And it's why I think it became so critical to look at, you're always going to have, especially in a growing organization, the B section is always going to be your biggest one. It just is, because you're growing. So you're adding people. There's no way for new people to be anything stronger than a B, right? Just going to have all these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed people in the B category waiting to figure out like where they're going to go, right? And they're vulnerable.
And when you do a bit of an audit of a key business unit and you realize that your GPA for that unit is sitting on like a 2.0, what are the immediate steps as a leader?
Well, a 2.0 would mean like everybody's a C player, which is, I guess you got to change your ranking system a little bit and decide, who's going to go first. But there's a big difference to me between someone who's not aligned with you culturally and someone's not aligned with you from a results standpoint. If someone's not aligned with you culturally, you need to just part ways. If they don't want to be there, if they're trash talking the company, you're not going to turn that around. You can't turn that around.
Yeah.
So a lot of it to me, again, we're using kind of these really sweeping kind of A, B, C player, but don't get me wrong. There needs to be like very detailed discussions around, okay, why are they there? Maybe they're a C player for a reason. Maybe their results are bad because they've gotten terrible training. We just turned over our GM, but their attitude is still at least okay. It could be recovered, right? And maybe the thing to do, instead of letting them go or smacking them on the side of the head or verbally or whatever, is almost like apologize. Hey, we know we haven't given you the best. You haven't seen our best yet. And I know maybe that's made you not want to be here as much as you were at the beginning, right? But here's what we're going to do to change our side. And here's what I need to see from you. And here's how we're going to measure it. And here's how I'm going to support you. and today's a new day and let's move forward. I would immediately, if they started performing, or not even performing, if they immediately started attempting to perform, then they would go out of the C category and into the B. I'd be like, they're in the wait and see thing. They're not in the doghouse. They didn't do anything. But again, if it's an attitude thing, totally different. That is not something that you can stand for. It's not like you can go, oh, Johnny hates us and says bad things about the company, but hopefully he'll improve on that over the next year.
Yeah.
They're either on board or they're not when it comes to that.
Yeah, completely hear you on that, Ken. And you mentioned there comes a point with the C players where you might just have to part ways. And how do you, from the leadership perspective, part ways with your C players gracefully without creating this kind of fear in the broader team?
I'll come back to the fear part, but the first one would be like, when do you know it's okay, or when is it appropriate to cut ties? It's really funny because I would go in fact, I'm going to use the same location that made me even think about this concept. It was San Antonio, Texas, by the way. And I remember coming in and we went through the whole exercise, and it was great for the GM and it was great for us. We ultimately, it was great for the partners there. And I remember I came back about 2 months later, and same person, same couple of people were ranked as C players. And there was some direction around it. Hey, this is the first time we've done this. So the direction around this is maybe, hey, let your people know that are underperforming, that they're underperforming, right? And if it's warranted, maybe we did a write-up or something. But we got to let them know, right? We got to let them know what's expected. We got to let them know where they stand. And come back about 2 months later, and he said, oh yeah, no, still terrible, this and that. And I said, okay, didn't you do performance reviews in between when I was here last? It might have been like 3 months or something. And I said, yeah. I said, go get them. Go get their personnel files. Of course, the performance review doesn't mirror what we're talking to them about, which is a leadership failure. Like,
Yeah.
we've got to do our part. So coming back to your question, when is it okay? Look, sometimes companies have to do things for financial reasons. That's different. I'm talking about strictly performance or attitude, right? In this case, it was, we need to make sure that A, they knew what's expected. B, they knew where they stood. C, we told them what to do to correct the behavior and provided, if necessary, like resources. And none of that had been done when I came back in for that second time. So it was like, I guess we're starting over now, because we're not going to just let someone go because behind the scenes, we're talking about them. It's not fair. So then we just laid it out to them, and it was like, let's do it right now. Let's bring them in, and hey, we've been going through this. We do this evaluation every now and then. This is the second time your name's come up. Here's why. What do you think about it? How can we help? What are you going to do? And I think one of the people ended up turning it around immediately. The other person we said goodbye to almost immediately. Either one of which is okay with me, just status quo isn't. I'd rather see everybody recover. Hiring people costs a lot of money. You got to train them. They got to get good at their job. They got to know your product. So I'd rather see them recover. But either way, status quo is just the thing you can't accept when it comes to the C players.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.
You know, most leaders don't build organizations, they build cages, and you can't grow if everything depends on you. Whether you're a founder scaling your company or a corporate leader running a high-performance team, growth starts with people. And that's why the first pillar at the Leaders Lab is building the right team. Before you scale, before you sell, before any big initiative, you need the right leaders around you. Our team has placed over 1,000 executives into Fortune 500 and fast-growing startups and supported over 75 acquisitions along the way, helping leaders create over $1 billion in enterprise value. At the Leaders Lab, we help you hire top talent, scale with confidence, and build a business or team that can thrive without you. Take the free Scale Up scorecard at theleaderslab.co or email me directly, ken@theleaderslab.co, to find out how ready your organization really is for growth. And now back to the playbook.
Yeah, I hear you, Ken. And I also feel like a lot of leaders are probably thinking, okay, now I've mapped out my team. in respect to either the Team GPA or this kind of ABC player process, what is the one mistake that leaders should be careful of when using a process like this to categorize and measure the performance of their team?
Being too quick to judge, blaming the individuals. But the other one, and I was just thinking about this before you asked this question, is we haven't talked about the A players at all. And there is this tendency to ignore your A players because they just get it done and they're easy. You just count on them so much that, you don't have to think about them a whole lot. And what I think ends up happening when you do have a lot of C players in an organization and you have a lot of new people is, as a leader, you're constantly putting out fires. You're constantly, this happened, so-and-so quit. We've got a problem over here. That there's no time left to go, oh, let me proactively go in and see what Onika needs or what Onika wants or how it's going with Onika. Onika doesn't get the leader jumping in the truck with her because they got to go jump in the truck with the people that are struggling, right? So, but if you clean that stuff up, even with your A players, they don't need as much attention, but they need some. They need an acknowledgement that they're kicking ass, and that's why you're not spending so much time with them. Sometimes that's enough.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a quick little text of going, hey, we haven't talked in a while. It's because you're so awesome, and I can just count on you, and I'm dealing with a lot of stuff right now. But if you need anything, reach out. And as soon as I get caught up here, I'll jump out in the field with you. We'll do some sales calls together. That sometimes is enough, just something simple.
Yeah. Completely hear you on that, Ken. And it's funny, it made me think of family dynamics where there's the really naughty sibling and then the really goody two-shoes one. And there's actually this dynamic that sometimes plays out where the really good sibling ends up rebelling because they want some of the attention from mom, dad, or both. And I feel like that could play out in this kind of scenario too. Right?
I think it can, because they're going, where's my promotion? Where's this? My attention? Because again, just like kids, there's two paths. With the kids, one of them thought that the path to success, and success to them meaning acceptance and parental love and stuff like that. One of them, their blueprint of that was being a good boy or a good girl, right?
Yeah.
Getting good grades, playing sports, doing whatever. And the other one was, well, that all seems kind of hard. And it seems like when I just steal candy from the grocery store, that gets me some attention, right? Or I smoke weed, or I do whatever. It's really odd. Sometimes we'll do things to get attention, even if it's not favorable attention, right? And that's why I think it just really makes sense to, again, pay attention to your top performers, let them know you're out there. They sometimes don't need the full day or even want the full day right along with them in the field. But I think just knowing that you're there, knowing that you're seeing that performance, that you're recognizing their performance, that they're on the depth chart for the next promotion or whatever. A lot of times just making sure that's communicated to a kid. Hey, Johnny, I know I haven't sat down with you on your homework, and it's because you're just so good at staying on top of it yourself. And you're always getting it done. And I really appreciate that, because mom or dad's been really busy lately. But if you need anything, buddy, just let me know. If you get stuck, if you have a problem, I'm here, right? I think that just goes a long way in work and at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you on that, Ken. On a practical level, how would one go about improving their team GPA? Because there's this element of individuals within the team and then trying to improve the collective GPA as well simultaneously.
I think you improve the collective through the individual. You know what I mean? You're just constantly looking at movement within the team, starting with a lot of times with those C players and what do they need to do. And then the conversation we had around the A's, okay, spend some time here. But just the idea of doing it, you're going to get better at it. You just are. We talk a lot about setting expectations for the team. You need a scoreboard too. So if you have this talent scoreboard where you're actually really consciously thinking about everybody together as a team, you're going to take action typically where you need to take action. And again, taking action doesn't mean cutting heads necessarily. Taking action means go be the leader you should have been a few months ago for this person and see what happens, right? There was an episode we did, or a clip that we did not too long ago, that ties in really well with what we're talking about, was if you treated the last 90 days of a relationship the way you treated it the first 90 days on both sides. So when you think about having a new employee, you've got very high hopes for them. You think they're going to be great, or you wouldn't have hired them. They think you're a great company, or they wouldn't have joined you. everybody's trying to meet the other person's expectations, right? The employee's trying to do a great job so that they'll stand out and look good and impress you. And you're trying to do right by them so that they feel like they came and landed in a good place to work. We need to do that at the end of a relationship as well, right? So if I'm getting down this path of, okay, listen, this person's now been identified as a C player. We've got to put them on a performance improvement plan. I've got to communicate to them where they stand, but I also need to show up for them in a way that maybe I haven't been recently, right? To help get them out of the doghouse if it's possible. At least then, if they don't meet me there, my conscience is clear, right?
Yeah.
I've shown up, I've done what I can. Of course, maybe some mistakes were made along the way, but at the end here, I've done everything I can. They're not willing to kind of get over the hump and they're not doing the things that they can do, then I can cut it. So for me, Onika, it really comes down to just having a clear conscience on my own behavior as a leader.
Absolutely. And that also comes back down to your level of internal integrity, but also you want to be able to sleep well at night, right?
Yeah.
It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the toughest ones for me have been and always will be if I let someone go, if it's they were an account manager for a huge account and that account goes away and there's not another place to put them. That kind of thing just is what it is and happens in business. But the other stuff, absolutely. I have to be able to just ask myself, did I do the things I was supposed to do to help make this person successful? And was I clear in our communication? And did they have enough time to do it? And if the answer to all of that is yes, then I don't want to say I like letting people go. It's not my favorite thing, but I'm just not going to lose sleep over it because in my mind, I didn't let them go. They let themselves go. Do you know what I mean? If everything they needed to do to recover was sitting in front of them, and because very rarely is it an aptitude issue. It's almost always a activity type issue or an attitude type issue. When people are in a situation like that, it's like you don't typically let a sales rep go because they didn't make quota. That's what they'll say at the end. But they didn't make quota because they weren't closing a lot of sales, and they weren't closing a lot of sales because they weren't setting a lot of appointments. And they weren't setting a lot of appointments because they weren't making the number of phone calls that they're supposed to make that are part of that equation. Now, closing sales might be an art that they need to develop, and I get that, and I can be empathetic to that. Picking up the phone is just a can do or a won't do, period. So if I go to you and say your sales are down, but the reason your sales are down, and we backtrack all the way, is because you're only making 100 calls a week and you need to make 200 calls a week. Are you committed to getting to the 200 calls a week? Because if you're not, none of this is going to pan out. It might spike for a week or two, but like over time, you'll never hit the numbers that you're trying to hit. Are you committed to doing 200 calls? Yes or no? Because if you're not, there's no reason to moving forward. If they say, yes, I'm committed, and then they don't do it, did I let them go or did they let them go? I'm really not going to lose sleep over that.
Yeah. I really like that, Ken. And it's a concept I used to talk to my team about as well. There's the output, which you sometimes have very like little direct control over. However, the input and the process, that is 100% within your control. And that's to your point. Like when we get to that output stage, there was so much that already fell through the cracks in these two stages.
You and I have talked about leading and lagging indicators before. Sales number is actually a lagging indicator. The sale that happened was the result of all the activity that took place before it, right? Leading indicator is the activity. So if I'm going to focus on somebody's improvement, all I care about is I don't care about the past anymore. But if I'm saying like, no, I still want you here, even though past results aren't good, but we're going to let that go. Let's just wipe the slate clean. Let's focus on the future. The future says that you need 200 calls a week. The past says you've only been making 100. If you're committed to doing the two, we've got something to talk about. I'm excited to work with you because regardless of whether you're closing sales or not closing sales, if you're making 200 calls a week, I'm in it with you now. We'll figure it out. If you're making 200 calls a week, then now we have that box checked. And now we can find out, is it that you're terrible at presenting? That's okay. We can work on that, but we don't know until you've solved this thing first, right? So let's solve this thing first and then move on to the next thing. But If you can't solve the first thing, which is the activity, it's like a janitor going like, I just don't want to sweep the floors. I do want to stay on and be the janitor. I just don't want to sweep or mop the floors. It's like you have to sweep and
Wow,
mop.
yeah.
Sales rep has to make calls. A
Yeah.
data entry person has to do data entry. A receptionist has to pick up the phone, right? We all just have to do certain parts of our job. So anyway.
No, I love the long run, Ken.
Yeah.
And yeah, curious, any key takeaways for anyone leaving this conversation that you want them to take with them?
I'd say you can very easily do this on your own, right? And we might create a little workbook. If we do, I'll put a link to it, but you could do it on your own in Excel or Google Sheet, right? And really all you need to do is down the left side, put everybody's name that directly reports to you, and then just put in the corresponding letter and the corresponding number, an A being a 4, a B being a 3. And you can do a little formula at the bottom that adds all the numbers together, divides them by the number of people on the team. That'll be your GPA. And then you could put dates above where you put those numbers to see how they change over time. My challenge to you would be, if you're taking that assessment, is for your C players, you got to do something about it, right? You just, what action are you going to take? Is it meeting with them, going over their numbers with them, figuring out if it's somebody that's so far gone culturally or attitude wise, or just maybe it is time to cut the cord, but you got to do something with the C's. Nothing's magically going to improve. And then I also want you to take a look at your A's and how can you leverage your A's. So that's another thing that we didn't talk about that we used to do is I would tell my A players that they were an A player. I would say we rank everybody quarterly. My boss comes in or I come in and I'm the boss. And we do this in our top 20%, meaning attitude, performance, and you're always in there. You're always in there.
Yeah.
And do you know that 70% of our people fall into this middle ground and they are vulnerable? They are looking for mentors either way. They're either looking for the dark side or they're either looking for Luke Skywalker or Darth Maul, one or the other, right? But they'll cling to somebody because they're impressionable still. I'd like you to help us mentor some of those B players. Is there anybody that you know personally, anybody that you've been connecting with, right? So you can actually not only recognize your A players as A players, but start using your A players to lift your B players up into A status before the C players get a hold of them, right? And then if you can just get rid of your C players, now I know that sounds harsh. When I say get rid of, I just mean change them from C to B or get rid of them out of the order. Either way, but the only thing that's not cool is staying a C player. So that became my main thing is I'm not coming back here on consecutive visits to see the same people ranked as C players without us doing some kind of action point, performance improvement plan, official write-up. If it's our fault, just us kind of changing things and them getting on board with the new program, like whatever. But that's the way to change it, Onika, because a beautiful thing is walking in and going, and when we really did have operations like this, where people could say, we don't have any C players anymore. We have people that are learning and we have people that are growing, but they're in the B player.
Yeah.
And I'm like, great. Then all we have to talk about is none of that kind of yucky turnover kind of stuff. But now we can just talk about how do we make everybody better then? How do we take these B players? How do we put them with A players that can mentor them? How does all of a sudden our top 20% of A players become 50%? What if our organization had 50% A players and then 50% B players that are learning and are all potential A's? And now our whole culture is driven by the A's, and all the B's, all they want is to become A players like they're heroes. That's a huge thing. That's how you turn an organization completely around.
Yeah, that's the dream, I think, for every organization.
Totally. And you can get there faster than you think. You really can.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. This conversation was incredible. And thank you so much for answering all my questions and for meeting with me today.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
That's it for this episode of The Playbook by the Leaders Lab. Thanks for spending some time with us. We'd love it if you would subscribe, share the show, and leave a quick rating and review. Your feedback helps us grow and it helps more leaders and founders join the conversation. If you'd like to talk more about hiring, scaling, or selling your business, please email me, ken@theleaderslab.co, or connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll be back soon with more strategies you can put to work today. I'm Ken Eslick with Onika Kwatsha. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week in the Playbook.